You are about to hear one of the most unbelievable survival stories ever told. Seriously, it's a story that just seems to defy all logic. A 17-year-old girl falls out of a plane as it disintegrates, 2 miles above the Amazon rainforest, and she lives. This is the incredible true story of Juliane Koepcke and Lanza Flight 508. Okay, so let's just start with the main, absolutely impossible question at the heart of all this. I mean, really think about it. How do you survive falling 2 miles from the sky while you're still strapped into your airplane seat into the middle of the Amazon jungle? Well, somebody did. And believe it or not, that's just where her story begins. I want you to just lock this number into your brain. 14. It seems so simple, so out of context right now. But trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand its absolutely heartbreaking significance. It's the key to understanding the razor-thin line between life and death. All right, let's go back in time. It's December 24th, 1971, Christmas Eve. You've got Lanza Flight 508 on what should be a totally routine flight over Peru. The plane is filled with 86 people, and most of them are just excited to get home to their families for the holiday. But then, as the plane starts to fly over the Amazon, it heads straight into a massive, dark thunderstorm. For the next 20 minutes, it was absolute chaos. The plane was being thrown around like a toy. Luggage started crashing down from the overhead bins onto the screaming passengers. And then a brilliant, blinding flash of lightning. A bolt hit the right wing, which immediately caught fire and was just torn from the plane. A few terrifying moments later, at about 10,000 feet, the entire aircraft just broke apart in midair. And here's the really tragic part of the story. The airline, Lanza, had a horrible safety record. In fact, people had this grim joke that its name stood for "it always falls belly first." The plane itself, a Lockheed Electra, was designed for flying in clear desert skies, with these really rigid wings that were totally unsuitable for the kind of severe turbulence you find in a thunderstorm. Looking back, it was a disaster just waiting to happen. And right in the middle of all that chaos, 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke was ejected from the plane, still belted into her row of 3 seats. She was sent tumbling end over end through the sky, all alone, falling 2 miles toward a sea of green that she later said just looked like a field of broccoli. So the big question is, how is that even possible? Well, it was basically a 1 in a billion combination of 3 things. First, the storm itself had these incredibly violent updrafts that acted like a natural parachute, slowing her down. Second, the row of seats she was strapped into started spinning like a maple seed, It created this helicopter effect that broke her fall even more. And finally, the dense jungle canopy itself acted like a giant leafy safety net, catching her and cushioning that final brutal impact. She woke up the next morning, on Christmas Day, on the jungle floor, covered in mud, in pain, and completely alone. Now, for most of us, this would be the green hell everyone talks about. But for Juliane, things were about to be very different. Meanwhile, the search parties, who just assumed there were no survivors, had already given up hope of finding anyone alive. Just look at her list of injuries. It's staggering. A broken collarbone, a sprained knee, deep cuts all over her arm and leg, a severe concussion, and one eye swollen completely shut. And to make it all worse, she'd lost her glasses, and she was incredibly nearsighted. I mean, the odds were just impossibly stacked against her. But here is the absolute turning point of this story. Juliane wasn't your typical teenager from the city. Not at all. Her parents were world-famous zoologists. They'd actually set up a research station deep in the Amazon, so she had spent a huge chunk of her childhood living in and learning from the exact same jungle she was now stranded in. And that was her secret weapon. Where most people would be completely paralyzed with fear, Juliane wasn't. She said later that she wasn't really afraid, because she knew that the jungle wasn't the monster, the green hell that people imagined. And that knowledge, that was everything. It gave her the power to think clearly, to make a plan, and to act. Her injuries were bad, there's no question. But after a day of just trying to process what happened, she knew she couldn't just stay put. If she wanted to live, she had to get moving. And she had a strategy. A single, simple piece of advice that would become her lifeline. This was the one survival rule her father had drilled into her head over and over again. This was her entire plan. Find water and follow it. She found a tiny little trickle of water seeping out of the ground, and she started to follow it, putting all her faith into that one simple piece of wisdom. Her trek turned into an 11-day test of pure human endurance. The only thing she had to eat was a small bag of candy she found in the wreckage. On the 4th day, she made a horrifying discovery. Another row of seats with 3 other victims inside. It was this grim, constant reminder of what had happened. But she just kept going. This is where her jungle upbringing became her greatest weapon. She knew which snakes were venomous. She knew which insects to stay away from. When she got to the river and saw alligators, she wasn't scared. Her father had taught her that they don't attack things in the water, so she just swam right alongside them. Most importantly, she knew not to eat any of the strange fruits or mushrooms she saw, a mistake that probably would have been fatal. But even with all her knowledge, her body was starting to give out. The jungle was taking its toll. A deep gash on her arm got infected by screwworm flies. Dozens of maggots hatched and actually started to burrow into her flesh, causing just excruciating pain. So by the 10th day, she was at her absolute limit. She was weak from starvation, she was riddled with infection, and she was even starting to hallucinate. She was ready to give up. She truly felt like her life was ending. And then she saw something that just didn't belong. Tied up on the riverbank was a small boat. At first, she was sure it was just another hallucination. But as she waded closer and actually touched it, she realized it was real. For the first time in 10 days, she had found a real, tangible sign of human life. The boat led her up a small path to a tiny little hut that was used by local loggers. It was empty, but it was shelter. And inside, she found a small container of gasoline. And she remembered another lesson her dad taught her about using gasoline to clean wounds. She poured it into her maggot-infested arm. The pain was just unbearable, but it worked. She said it forced over 30 maggots out of her arm. She decided her best bet was to just wait. The next evening, she heard voices. 3 men came out of the jungle, and they just stopped dead in their tracks. When they saw this ghostly, skeletal girl with swollen eyes and torn clothes, they thought she was the Yaku Mama, a mythical water spirit from their local folklore. She explained who she was in broken Spanish. The men were just stunned. They told her the news they'd heard on the radio. Out of 86 people on the plane, everyone had died. Juliane's heart just sank because she knew that meant her mother was gone. At that moment, she thought she was the only one who had made it. But the full story of the crash, well, it was even more tragic than that. Her rescue, as you can imagine, made headlines all over the world. But for Juliane, surviving the fall and then the jungle, that was really just the beginning. The experience would go on to define the entire rest of her life and give her a brand new, profound sense of purpose. And now, let's go back to that number from the beginning, 14. Investigators eventually discovered that 14 other passengers, including the pilot, had actually survived the initial crash, but they were badly injured. And they did what most of us would do. They stayed at the crash site, and they waited for a rescue that never came in time. They all died in the jungle. Juliane, because of her knowledge and her father's advice, didn't wait. She walked, and that single decision made all the difference. Juliane ended up following in her parents' footsteps. She became a renowned zoologist, and she has dedicated her life to preserving the very same rainforest that had taken her mother's life, but had also saved her own. As she put it herself, the rainforest caught me and saved me. I felt it was my duty to give something back to it. From the absolute worst tragedy you can imagine, she found her life's true purpose.